Hello and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well and welcome to another video. And today we have a long one. So get yourself comfortable, get yourself a beverage and tune in to all the books that I read in January, February, and March of this year, which is a lot because I hadn't filmed a wrap up in 3 months. So now we're going to have to go through all of them in one sitting. In these 3 months, I read a total of 37 books, so let's get right into it because we have a lot of books to talk about. In the month of January, I read a total of 12 books, and 2 of those were fantasy, 9 of those were romance, 1 was a general fiction, and that was a total of 5,208 pages. So the first book I read in January was The Happy Ever After playlist by Abby Jimenez, and this is the second book in the Friend Zone series. This one follows Sloane and Jason, and it starts off with Sloane going to the cemetery to go visit her fiance who had died. However, on her way there, she almost runs over a dog. And the dog basically like jumps onto her car and jumps into the car through her sunroof, which is actually kind of a very funny scene. I really liked that scene going into this book. So she sees that the dog has a collar and she tries to get a hold of the owner because it's obviously a lost dog, but she's unable to get a hold of anybody. Nobody's answering the phone. No one's calling her back. She's leaving voicemails. She's sending texts, everything. But in the meantime, she's just kind of taking care of him herself while she's waiting for a response from the owner. He finally gets back to her, and that's Jason. And it turns out he's in Australia for work, and he asks her very kindly to hold on to the dog for a little bit longer until he can get back to the state. Their banter is really, really cute in this. I love the writing. Abby Jimenez writing is absolutely perfect every single time. It always, always, always hits for me. The exchange with the texts and the calls and everything was really, really cute. When Jason comes back into the States, their relationship does develop really nicely, maybe a little on the fast side, like ever so slightly insta-lovey, but it wasn't enough to like get me out of the story. I still really, really enjoyed the story. The writing was amazing and this story was really, really fun. So it started off really fun and lighthearted and funny, and then turned into kind of like a more emotional story. So it just gave everything. She is one of my top favorite authors, so I have been reading her backlist, and I did finish the series in a future month that you'll see in this wrap up as well, like the next book in the series. But yeah, she's just one of my favorite authors. Everything she writes is just really, really good, or has been really, really good so far. So I'm really enjoying her. I really enjoyed this book and I was very happy I read this one, and I rated this one 4 stars. So that's the first book we read in January. And this is actually the first book I read in 2025. Abby Jimenez, starting off strong. The next book I picked up was The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. And this is a cozy fantasy kind of world where witches exist and they live amongst humans. And in this society, witches are basically told that they have to live in seclusion, essentially. Like they can't have too many witches in one area because apparently their powers will start acting differently or something, which would make it more likely for them to be found out. And that's kind of like the story that they're always told. So most of the witches in this world essentially like live in seclusion. They live by themselves. And the main character, Mika, is one of those witches, and she belongs to this secret society of witches where that information is basically shared with them and like passed on to them. So because she's kind of lonely, she decides to post some videos on social media about her kind of like pretending to be a human, pretending to be a witch. You know, she does like little magic tricks that are blatantly obvious that it's like a human pretending to be a witch, but she's in fact doing those magic tricks. And lo and behold, somebody discovers her and realizes that she's actually a real witch. And that person or group of people is actually the people living in this house right here. And they are humans, and they actually are raising 3 little witches, like 3 young witches, 3 girls. And they need help. They need a witch to help them out, you know? And so Mika decides, okay, this is probably worthwhile, so I'm gonna go and check this out. And she decides that she is gonna go, and she ends up moving into the house and being their teacher. The love interest in this is the librarian Jamie, and he's kind of like in charge of the estate, and they have a really cute, you know, development of a relationship. It's not super heavy on the romance or the relationship. It's mostly about like Mika teaching the girls and kind of like embedding herself into their life and like teaching them how to do spells, how to basically be witches, and how to control their magic. Overall, it was a really cute, cozy read. I would definitely recommend reading this in the fall for the cozy vibes, and I ended up rating this one 3.75 stars. So that's book number 2. Okay, the next 3 books I read back to back are the rest of the Magnolia Parks series, which is Daisy Hates the Great Undoing, Magnolia Parks The Long Way Home, and Magnolia Parks Into the Dark. Now, this series, it started off really, really good. I did really enjoy this series, but I didn't absolutely love it the way some people love this series. I liked the first book. The first book really sucked me in, the Magnolia book. It was completely different than what I expected going into it, and I did really enjoy that book. I gave that book 5 stars. Not because it was like a masterpiece in any way whatsoever. It was just like so unexpectedly different that I just couldn't put it down when I was reading it. Like I was really sucked into the story and into the characters, and like I know that they're very toxic and I just wanted to find out like what's going on with them. However, I felt like the rest of the books in this series were just kind of like a repetition. They were kind of going through the same situations over and over again. It's like same shit, different day. You know, these didn't pull me in quite as much as the first one. I still enjoyed them. Like I liked them. I listened to most of these on audio because I felt like not that I was like wasting time reading these, but I just felt like I was hearing the same thing over and over again. There were different events that happened, but I just wasn't like really grabbed by it. I wasn't really sucked in. I wasn't really pulled in. I just couldn't find myself caring all that much. I'm glad I'm done with the series. I'm glad I read it because now I know what all the hype is about. I can see why people really love this series though. It is a good series to just kind of get lost in and just kind of like get lost in the characters and like what they're doing and their drama. So I ended up rating all of these 4 stars. They're a really good pastime, like overall fun and like easy to get lost in. And I will definitely read the last book when it comes out, the last Daisy book. But if you did ask me right now which ones I preferred, whether it's the Magnolia or the Daisy ones, it's definitely the Magnolia ones. So that's the rest of the Magnolia Park series, and these were all 4 stars. The next book I read was Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams. This is the second book in the When in Rome series, and this follows Annie and Will. Annie is the youngest of the group of siblings. In the first book, When in Rome, he's the oldest brother. And then there's, I think, Emily, maybe one other sibling, and then Annie. And this book I absolutely loved. So in this book, Will comes to Rome to be Amelia's bodyguard. If you remember Amelia and Noah from the first book, Amelia's like a pop star singer, but he has some downtime. And Annie is the youngest sister, like I mentioned, and she has like social anxiety. She really wants to be in a relationship, but she always struggles on dates with like being herself and being comfortable on dates. So Amelia has this idea that Will should go and take her on some practice dates so that she can get comfortable being herself on dates. You know, it's kind of like practice dating, which I thought was really, really cute. He's a really nice guy, but he has like this bad boy image, you know, he's got like tattoos and he's supposed to be like this kind of, not like serial dater, but he dates a lot. So they're kind of opposites in that sense, but it's such a really cute dynamic between them. I just absolutely love it. And just their dynamic together, their banter, the tension between them, it's just so, so good. I would say this is probably my favorite book in the series, although the series itself is so, so good. So I highly recommend you read When in Rome and this book. And there's also another book after that, Beg, Borrow, or Steal, which I did end up reading, I think, in January as well. So I'll go through that in a little bit. But this entire series is just so, so good. And I think this is my favorite book in that series. This is probably like what my perfect fluffy romance would be. Like this is perfect writing, perfect banter, perfect humor. Everything about it was so, so good. So highly recommend this book. And of course, this was a 5-star read. Okay, the next book I read was Dishonestly Yours by Krista and Becca Ricci. And this is the first book of their spin-off series after Addicted series and Calloway Sisters series, which I haven't read yet. But I did start reading the series because it's like the newer series. So I ended up reading this one, and this was also really, really good. I had a great time with this one. This one basically follows 2 best friends, Phoebe and Haley, and they are in like these 2 families that basically are con artists. Like that's their family business, and both of the families just like collaborate on doing these cons, okay? And Phoebe and Haley decide that they no longer want to live the con life. So they run away and move to a different state where they can start over and see if they can make it without conning people. And Haley's brother, Rocky, finds out where they go, and he's kind of like the love interest of Phoebe, and he follows them to see and make sure that they're okay. Okay. Now, There is a lot of tension between Rocky and Phoebe because usually they're the two that are paired up for the cons to be like either boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, but they have this agreement where they're not going to date each other in real life or be together in real life because of all the stuff that they've gone through during cons, and they just don't think it's a good idea. So there is a lot of romantic tension between the two of them. I really enjoyed the concept of this book. I think it is so fun. I'm very excited to read the second book, and I'm definitely going to be reading the series. It's very different than anything I've read. I haven't read anything about like, con families before. So I was really into it, and I loved how like they would actually go into chapters of like in the past timelines of them doing the cons and explaining what they did, because that was really, really fun. There are some emotional aspects to this. I don't know if you really need to read trigger warnings for this or not, but there are some hard traumatic events that do occur. So maybe it's a good idea if you are overly sensitive to these things, but just putting it out there that there are some sensitive topics discussed in this. But overall, I had a really great time with this book. It really kept my attention. The writing was really good, and I ended up rating this one 4.25 stars. The next book I read was Unro Romance by Erin Connor, and this one I actually vlogged in my Reading New Releases in January vlog. So if you want detailed thoughts on this one, definitely check out that video. This book follows Sawyer and Mason, and Sawyer is a romance author who is struggling for romantic inspiration, and Mason is an actor who is kind of like a hopeless romantic, but he keeps getting his heart broken, so he wants to become more of a cynic. They meet each other and they decide to go on dates where he will teach her how to be more of a romantic, take her on these like inspiring romantic dates so that she gets inspiration for her book. And during that process, Sawyer is going to teach him how to become more of a cynic and like ruin that kind of like vision that he has of being a hopeless romantic, so that's their agreement. It's actually really, really good. This book is really fun. It's really funny. I loved their dynamic and how their romance developed. Definitely check out that vlog for full thoughts on this book, but I ended up rating this one 4.5 stars. The next book I read was The Pairing by Casey McQuiston, and this book follows Theo and Kit, and they're both exes, and somehow accidentally they end up booking the same Food and Wine European tour. Okay, so they're on the same trip together, and they definitely are not together as a couple anymore. So there's tension between them. Now, I don't know how this came about, but somehow they get into this like revenge competition of who can hook up more with other people, like with randos, and make each other jealous. And I just didn't really get into this book. Like that was really hard for me to get into because this was like completely not what I expected. I expected this to be kind of like a eat, pray, love kind of thing where they're both on the same trip and there's like a lot of like romantic tension and, like angst going on, but that's not what we got in this book. In this book, they were basically trying to make each other jealous by hooking up with random people, and there was absolutely no feelings involved, no love, nothing emotional. It really fell flat for me when it came to their relationship. I just didn't like this book at all. The first half of this book was in Theo's POV, and that was like the worst part of it because there was like literally no emotion, like no love, nothing. It was just like random hooking up and very spicy and very kind of like cringe and crude. But the second half of this book was in Kit's POV, and that was a little bit better. Not much better, but a little bit better. Like he felt a little bit more genuine to me with his feelings and everything. But I feel like if the POVs were flipped, I would have DNF'd this book because it was just so cringy. So I didn't love this one. I did rate it 2 stars because of like the vibes of like the scenery and like the food descriptions and everything. Like that was really well done. But the story itself, the characters, and like what was going on with them, it did not float my boat. I just felt really cringed out by it. It gave me the ick. So I didn't love it. I gave it 2 stars, and I fear I was too generous with this one, unfortunately. But yeah, that's The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. Okay, the next book I read was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, which is the first book in the Folk of the Air series. And this was actually really good. This is a young adult fantasy, and I actually love this a lot more than I expected I would love it. This basically follows the main character, Jude, who has 2 younger sisters. As a child, when she was 10 years old or something like that, they're living in the human world, and this fairy comes in and basically murders her parents right in front of her and her sisters, and then steals them to go go live in the land of the Fae. So the three girls end up growing up in the land of the fairy, in like the kingdom of the Fae, and there's a lot of like different rules of the Fae. Like the Fae are really, really cruel and evil, and they play tricks on you, and it's just like all these different rules of the Fae that like are very interesting to read about. And honestly, they are just so cruel to these girls sometimes, and it was kind of hard to read at times, but it was definitely interesting. It was a page turner. There's a lot of twists and turns that I didn't expect. I just didn't expect this book to be what it was in general. So essentially what happens is Jude is a very good fighter. She's good with the sword, and she has this dream of becoming a knight, like being a knight for the king, which is kind of unheard of because she's a human and she doesn't have the same kind of like strength and powers as the Fae do, but she really, really wants it. So she's kind of like dealing with trials related to that. Prince Carden is the love interest, but there's really no romance in this book at all whatsoever. But Prince Carden is one of the fairies that she catches his attention. Him and his siblings are actually some of the worst Fae when it comes to like how they treat the humans and how badly they treat them, and like the kind of like jokes that they play on them. It's actually really, really terrible, but definitely interesting to read nonetheless. Like it is a completely different world. It definitely paints the Fae in like a very different way that I was not expecting, that no other book really has done in the past. It was definitely a page turner, a lot of high stakes things happening, and a lot of twists and turns that I was definitely not expecting. The writing is also really, really good. It's not too flowery or anything like that, but descriptive enough to make it feel magical. And even though it is a YA, it didn't read like a YA book. Like the writing was really, really good. So I actually really recommend reading this book, even if you don't read YA. It's very interesting. It's very magical. It will just completely pull you into this world where you can feel like you're getting lost in this story. So highly recommend this one. In the moment after I read it, I rated it 3.5, but now thinking about it, I feel like it's probably more of like a 4-star read. So that's The Cruel Prince. The next book I read was The Favorites by Lane Fargo, and this one I also vlogged in that Reading New Releases vlog that I posted in January. So go ahead and watch that video for like detailed thoughts on this book. But this one was really, really good. I really, really love this book. This follows Katerina and Heath, and they are both ice skaters competing for the Olympic gold. It's written in this like interview style, kind of like the movie I, Tonya, where like side characters are being interviewed in the present moment for a documentary, and they're discussing like what they thought was going on and just their opinions about like what happened with Katerina and Heath and all the scandal that was going on. I read this in like 1 or 2 sittings. It was so fun. It was so interesting. Like so much happens. So many people are toxic. There's like not one good character in this book that you can be like, wow, this is a really good person. Everybody does bad things in this book. Everybody's like kind of like lying, cheating, stealing to get ahead. And it's just so interesting and fun to read. I loved the writing. I loved the interview style and like the documentary style of this book. I just was completely like sucked in right away from the very beginning, just like wanting to know what's going to happen with them. I ended up rating this one 4.5 stars. Highly recommend this book. I've already been recommending this book to so many people in my life because it's just like such a fun read. And if you haven't read this yet, please read it. And then the final book of January was Beg, Borrow, and Steal by Sarah Adams, which is the 3rd book in the When in Rome series following the older sister Emily. Emily is a 2nd grade teacher and also an aspiring romance author. And she has this kind of like rival, Jack Bennett, who is also a 2nd grade teacher in her school. And they've kind of been like competing in these random like small little acts of competition throughout their lives since college, and they just generally dislike each other a little bit, you know, for like various reasons because of like this competitive nature that the two of them have. So he is supposed to be leaving Rome because he was engaged and getting married, but turns out he's staying because his relationship falls apart. So he ends up staying in Rome, and then Emily's all like, ugh, damn it, I thought I was getting rid of him already. But nonetheless, he stays. I thought the banter in this was so, so funny. Sarah Adams does the best banter. She does such funny lines and quips and just really, really good banter. So I highly recommend reading all her books if you like funny books. This was really, really funny. I absolutely loved it. I also loved the tension between them. I liked the characters. I feel like practice makes perfect. I related more to those characters because Annie was like the youngest daughter and Emily's like the oldest daughter. So she has like oldest daughter tendencies. So I definitely related to the youngest daughter because I'm the youngest in my family and I just related to her more. But I still really, really enjoyed this. And I just loved all the events that happened in this book. It was so funny. So this was a 4.75 star and I ended up rounding up to 5 stars on Goodreads. Okay, so now for February. In the month of February, I ended up reading 14 books and 5 of those were fantasy. 8 were romance and 1 was a dark romance, and that totaled 5,332 pages. The first book of February was Throne of Secrets by Carrie Maniscalco, and this is the second book in the Princes of Sin series following Throne of the Fallen. And this one follows Prince Gluttony, Gabriel, and Adriana. And it starts off with the Princes of Sin basically like hunting these ice dragons because apparently there's like this agreement between the Princes of Sin and these ice dragons where the dragons won't kill people and instead the Princes of Sin will hunt them for sports just to kind of like keep their minds active, but there's like an agreement that there's no killing going on. And apparently one of the dragons tries to eat one of his brothers. So it's kind of like a big secret because that would be very bad if like these dragons started killing off the humans or demons or whatever. And Adriana is a reporter who gets wind of that and thinks that if she could get this information about what's going on with these dragons, that she can, you know, be the first to put out this article and that would be a very big paycheck for her. She is from a very wealthy family who had lost their entire fortune and now she's like struggling financially. It's actually pretty interesting in the first half of the book, but in the second half of the book, I feel like we lose the plot a lot in exchange for just like a lot of random smut. And I just wasn't feeling it. So I just really didn't enjoy that half of the book as much as I had expected. There are some good twists and turns. Like there is like a twist at the end that like where you kind of like find out the culprit of a specific situation. And I definitely was surprised by that. I was not expecting that. So that was kind of like a fun little twist. But overall, it was just okay. So I ended up rating this one 3 stars. The next book I read was Fear the Flames by Olivia Rose Darling, and this one unfortunately fell flat for me again. So it follows Princess Eowyn. There is this prophecy that she's essentially going to be either the ruination of her kingdom or like the glory of her kingdom. And when she's born, she is gifted these 5 dragon eggs. So she raises these dragon eggs and they have like this connection, like this bond between them that is unbreakable, which is a really, really good concept. But what happens is in the prologue, essentially she's being a kid. I think she's like 5 years old or something, and she doesn't want to go down for dinner. She's kind of like throwing a little tantrum or whatever, and she doesn't want to go down for dinner. So the king, her father, goes up to her room and he raises a hand to her. And in defense of her, one of the dragons steps in and kind of like takes off his pinky finger. So he gets angry and he decides to just like throw his child and the dragons into the dungeons. Okay, his like precious child, he just like 5-year-old child, he just like throws her into the dungeons as punishment and she's got to stay there. So fast forward to adulthood, she somehow escapes and she wants to rescue her dragons because I think she's like 18 already or something. And she's been living kind of like in hiding for like a few years while her dragons were still in the dungeons. So she ends up running into Caden, who's like, I don't know if he's like a prince or a warrior or what, but he's like her father's mortal enemy or like an enemy. He's like on the other side. He lives in a different city. And he essentially makes her this bargain where he's going to help her retrieve the dragons, like rescue the dragons. And in exchange, she and the dragons will be on their side in the next war. So deal, fine, yes, helping get my dragons back and we'll fight with you. So the concept of this is really, really good. Like I really liked the idea of this. I expected this to be really, really good. It sounds like a really great romantasy story of like, you know, the quests they have to go on, rescue the dragons. She's got this guy with her who's a protector, like protect her at all cost kind of thing. And that all sounds really, really good. However, the execution of this was not very good. Everything kind of fell flat. The moments kind of fell flat. There wasn't enough emotions. It just kind of felt like I was reading words on paper and I couldn't get lost in the story. It felt like the author had like a bullet point of points that she wanted to hit. and just kind of like filled in the rest with like random like mediocre transitions, and it just wasn't doing it. It wasn't fleshed out very well at all whatsoever, and like the romance scenes were not there. There was definitely a lot of spice in this book, but there just wasn't enough romance. There wasn't enough emotion, enough feeling. I just couldn't get into it, and I just didn't feel like I was in the story. So I was pretty disappointed with this one, and I know that there is going to be a second book to this, and hopefully like she does a better job. I don't know at this point if I'm going to read it, but I would like to maybe give her another chance because I really like the idea of this. However, the execution was just bad. So I ended up rating this one 2.75 stars just because like the concept of it could have been good. It just unfortunately fell flat. The next book I read in February was a reread of Fourth Wing, and I did my annotations for this in anticipation of Onyx Storm. I didn't really remember what happened in these books, and so I decided to do a reread. Now, this book definitely much better on the reread. I think the first time I read this book, it was like my first fantasy. I just kind of like didn't know what to expect. It was my first like kind of like dragon fantasy. But the second time around, I had a really, really good time. I really enjoyed this the second time around. I had a great time doing annotations. I also listened to the graphic audio at the same time that I was reading this, so it was kind of like an immersive experience, and I just really liked it so much more the second time around. So if you maybe didn't love this book the first time you read it, maybe give it another chance because there was just like a lot going on in here. And it could have also been like my mood. When I was reading it the second time, I was in a really good mood and I was happy and I was like having fun because of the graphic audio and like the sound effects, and it was just like a lot more immersive. But I ended up bumping up my rating for this one to 4.5 stars. Originally, I think I gave it a 3. But yeah, it was definitely a lot better on the reread. So that's Fourth Wing. The next book I read in February was Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. And this was probably my most anticipated new release for this year, just because I absolutely love Ali Hazelwood's writing and all her previous books. I had just such a great time with her books. And this was probably my #1 new release for this year. This was interesting. It's definitely different than her other books. Well, not completely different. It's kind of like similar to maybe Not in Love a little bit, but with like a very specific kink. And I definitely liked Not in Love better. That's probably my #1 book of hers that I just really, really loved. But this was still interesting and emotional. This one follows Scarlett and Luke. Scarlett is like a diver and she's training to be in the Olympics. And Luke is already like an Olympic gold medalist in swimming. Okay, so they have very high level competitive skills in their sports, and they're both in college and, you know, competing to get to the Olympics again, essentially. Now, Scarlett has this friend, Penelope, who's on her team, and Penelope was dating Luke, but they broke up because they're not compatible with each other romantically, so they just decided to call it quits. And then Penelope is like, hey, I found out something that, you know, you and Luke have in common, so you two should date. So Scarlett and Luke decide that they're gonna maybe talk about it and see if maybe they are compatible in that sense. And turns out that they are. And they're kind of like experimenting with each other when it comes to that. Now, the other storyline is that Scarlett is also dealing with like a mental blockage related to her diving because she got injured in the past and she spent many, many months or maybe even years, I don't even know how long, recovering from her injury. And so she has this mental blockage where she can't do an inward dive. And that's kind of like the dive where like she's on a diving board and they kind of have to dive like that. I don't know if that's a very good representation of it, but it's very dangerous. Her sport in general is very, very dangerous because of like the height that she's coming in to the water, and it could basically kill you or break your spine or whatever if you do it wrong. So it's a very dangerous sport. She's in therapy when it comes to that, and there's like a lot of emotional stuff going on with her, which I really felt bad for her. Like I really felt for her reading that stuff about her and like what she's going through. There's also kind of like a third storyline going on, like a very small side plot with Penelope as her friend. A lot of people didn't like this part of the book with Penelope and like their friendship and like what happens there. Personally, I thought that maybe that was kind of a little bit realistic because in certain moments where Scarlett is like thinking about Penelope and like what Penelope would think, or like if Penelope would be mad about the things that she's doing, and like in the moment I was kind of like annoyed by that as well. I was like, well, just who cares what Penelope thinks, you know, like who cares? just live your life. But then I thought like her emotional state and like the way that she was dealing with her trauma and like all her feelings and emotions and the stuff that she was going through, she felt like very out of control. It almost kind of felt realistic, that she was actually written as a very realistic character. And for that reason, I actually decided that I actually like Scarlett a lot, and like that she is a really good portrayal of somebody who might be dealing with those kinds of emotional issues, and that is how they would react. Luke, however, was not my favorite character. He felt very robotic to me. I couldn't really connect with him. Like, a lot of people seemed to like Luke as a character. I personally did not. I felt like he was very robotic. I couldn't really feel the emotion from him, but that was also kind of like his character. He was supposed to be like this rigid, controlling sort of person, very in control of his life. Everything has to be like planned out step by step, and like that was his life, and that's kind of like how he became like an Olympic gold medalist, because he has that kind of discipline. But when it comes to her and like their relationship, I just wasn't really feeling him, so he wasn't really my favorite character. The twist at the end with Penelope, again, a lot of people were very triggered by that. I personally was like, whatever. Like, sometimes people act like that and sometimes that happens. So like, I felt like that was maybe a little bit realistic, because they're still in college, so they maybe are acting a little bit like high schoolers. It was annoying, but I didn't absolutely hate it. I felt like it could have been realistic, so I let that go. But again, a lot of people were triggered by that, and like a lot of people didn't like this book specifically because of that one situation and how Scarlett reacted. Yeah, I don't know. There's just a lot of mixed reviews on this book, a lot of different thoughts on this book, but those are my thoughts. I liked Scarlett as a character. I felt like she was very realistic in the way that she handled everything in her life. It wasn't perfect, but I felt like it was realistic for like the emotional state that she was in and the physical state that she was in. So for that reason, I ended up rating this book 4 stars. Okay, battery has been swapped. So let's keep going. The next book I read was Under Lock and Key by Lana Ferguson, and this is kind of like a monster romance, and this was really, really good. This was really fun, really good banter. It basically follows Key and Lachlan, Locke in the title. Essentially what it is Kiana is American and her father dies, and so she goes to Scotland to scatter his ashes and like meet her family there. But the family is not super receptive. At least the grandmother is not super receptive to her, because the son had left them for whatever reason. And so she's dealing with that and like trying to understand the families. So when she's there, she's on a rock and thinking about scattering the ashes. She slips on the rock and then almost falls in, but gets rescued by Lachlan. And he is the farmhand on the McKay grounds. So they definitely don't like each other from the very, very start. He has a secret that he's not sharing, but he is also trying to find out like some secrets from like the past. And she actually convinces him to let her help him somehow. So he agrees, and they're on this quest to figure out what this secret is between the two families and like the history there. It's very interesting. The banter is really, really good. There's a lot of little hidden surprises. One especially about Kiana that kind of like reveals itself along the way that I definitely was not anticipating. I didn't love that part of the story because I didn't love like her reaction to it. Like, I feel like if it was me and I was in that situation and I was like learning this thing about myself, I would be freaking out or like having like a very real reaction to that. Whereas she kind of like was a little bit nonchalant about it. So I didn't think that part of the story was developed very, very well, but it was still good besides that. So I had a really good time with this book. I laughed out loud. It was also emotional and just like heartwarming in other places. And I really liked these characters and just had a fun time reading it. That's all. So it was just kind of like a monster romance that, you know, you would not expect. And I ended up rating this one 4 stars. Okay, the next book I read was The Love of My Afterlife by Kirsty Greenwood. And this book I really, really loved. So this one I vlogged in my reading blind dates with a book. This was the 3rd book I added to that vlog because I didn't have a 3rd blind date with a book. So I had added this one because I had wanted to read it for a while, and it was so, so good. Full thoughts in that vlog, so go ahead and watch that video as well if you haven't yet. And I just really, really love this book. This was one of the funniest books I've read, and also one of the most emotional books I've read, but like literally the best banter I've read in a while. So I really, really loved it. It follows the main character, Delphi, who basically, like on the first page, she basically dies at the age of 27 because she chokes on a burger in her apartment and she gets sent to the afterlife. life. And while she's there, she runs into this guy who she thinks is her soulmate, or she's told that's her soulmate. And the intake lady does her a favor and sends her back down to earth for 10 days to see if she can make that guy fall in love with her, or kiss her, I think it was. Within those 10 days, like find him, meet him, and have him kiss her out of his own volition. And then if that happens, she can stay on earth and continue living her life with her soulmate. And if it doesn't, she has to come back to the afterlife and maybe like help her out with like this project that she's doing over there, you know, that she really doesn't want to do. So it was really, really funny, really well written for like the concept of like a very serious concept. It was really well written in a very humorous way. And I just had like the best time with this book. There were literally moments where I was laughing out loud in this book, especially like the part in the rain. I think I called it out in my vlog, but there is like a part in the rain that is just like the most hilarious moment in any book that I've read. So highly recommend you read this book. This was a definite 5-star, one of my favorite top reads of the year. And I just had such a great time with this book. So highly recommend Love of My Afterlife by Christy Greenwood. I think she has another book that she published like a while ago that I might pick up as well, because I really, really loved her writing and like the story and like the humor that she infused into her writing. Then the next book I read was Life's Too Short by Abby Jimenez, which is the third book in the Friend Zone series, right after the Happy Ever After playlist, which I started off the year with. And this book was an emotional roller coaster. You go through so many emotions with this book. It is funny, it is so sad, and there are just like angry moments and just like so many emotions. Like if you're looking for an emotional book, this is it right here. I laughed out loud in so many of these scenes. And then I also ended up crying and like sobbing hysterically by the end of this book. It was just incredibly like gut-wrenching and sad and all those things, you know, like all the emotions basically. The story here follows Adrian and Vanessa ends up taking care of a baby that is her sister's, and she's basically raising it like it's her own baby for the foreseeable future. Also, Vanessa is struggling with a fatal disease, and she knows that she's going to die, so she's living like this life's too short mentality. Like she's trying to live the days that she has to the fullest. She's also kind of like a social media influencer or like a YouTuber or something like that, and she's also the one who is supporting her family with the income coming from like the YouTube channel that she's been running or whatever. Her family is not the best. They are dealing with a lot of mental issues on their own, so it's just like a really hard situation for everybody. Now, Adrian is, I think he's a criminal defense attorney, and he owns the building that Vanessa is living in, and he has something going on the next day, and he hears this baby crying, so he comes, knocks on the door in the middle of the night, and actually ends up helping her. And they actually end up having like this kind of like mutual friendship where they help each other. He helps her with the baby and she helps him with his dog because he's also taking care of like this animal. I really loved both of these characters, especially Adrian in this book. He is like just the most genuine guy. He is like golden retriever, acts of service, so dependable, so thoughtful, like really, really caring and genuinely kind. And I really, really loved his character. He was written so well. There are just so many sweet and emotional moments in this book, like really making you think about life and like what's important in life. And I really, really loved it. So this was a great book. Highly recommend this series as well. This was probably my favorite one in this entire series. I rated this one 4.75 stars and rounded up to 5 stars on Goodreads. The next book I read was End of Story by Kylie Scott. And this is another one that was in the Blind Dates with a Book vlog. And this one follows Susie and Lars. And Susie just inherited a house that she needs to renovate. And Lars is her ex-boyfriend's best friend who owns like a construction company, and he comes in to help her renovate the house. However, while he's like doing the first inspection and like checking things, looking into walls and seeing like if there's like rot and mold and whatever, he ends up finding a piece of paper that is actually an official divorce certificate between him and Susie. And neither of them know like whether or not it's a joke or if somebody's playing a trick on them or if the other one is playing a trick on them, but they end up trying to figure out like like what is going on and kind of like navigating their relationship, knowing that like one day if they do go through with being in a relationship together, one day they might get married and then get divorced, you know. So this was actually a very interesting story. I didn't absolutely love this book, but I did enjoy it. I thought it was interesting in the sense that like, you know, like how do you navigate those issues? And I thought that communication was really good in this book. The writing was really good. And I really enjoyed how Susie had set boundaries with her family specifically and like how she communicated them. And she was like just a very strong female main character. And I really liked her. I didn't really feel their romance as much as I had hoped, but overall it was still like a fun, enjoyable read. So I ended up rating this one 3 stars. And then the other book that I read in that vlog was Blame It on the Brontes by Annie Serino. And this one basically follows the main character Athena and her ex-boyfriend Thorn. And this is technically a third chance romance. She is an English professor and she is essentially trying to write her dissertation. And for her dissertation, she chooses a topic of like trying to find out who this one secret author is who apparently lives in her old hometown. And so she goes back home and she gets a job as a waitress working for Thorn, her ex. And that was basically intended to like put her in a position where she can like talk with the people in the town and kind of like overhear gossip and stuff like that. So she could get information about who this author C.S. Garland is so that she can write her dissertation. There really wasn't any tension or banter or angst or anything like that, which I need in a romance. I also didn't really love the writing. It was a little too descriptive for me and just included so many details that I just didn't care about. I really didn't care about what was happening in the story very much. It felt too long. It felt a little bit boring and I just didn't care about the events that were going on. And I didn't feel drawn in by their romance or their relationship. And I didn't really love that it's a third chance either because second chances usually hit or miss for me anyways. And them having been together and then breaking up and then hooking up again and then breaking up and then coming back again, it just felt like not my vibe. Also, a lot of like the Bronte sisters references were lost on me because I haven't read those. So maybe this book just wasn't for me, but maybe it is for you if you like classics or if you like Bronte sister references or whatever. But this one just unfortunately wasn't for me and I ended up giving it 2 stars. The next book I read was First Time Caller by B.K. Borison. And this is her first book in the Heartstrings series, her new release that came out in February around Valentine's Day. And this was really, really sweet. So this follows Aiden Valentine, and he is the host of a romance hotline, and she is a single mom, and she is kind of like lonely. She's not in a relationship or anything like that, but her daughter feels like she needs a little bit of help in that department. So she calls into the hotline. Lucy goes in and catches her while she's talking on the phone with Aiden on the hotline. And she's like, who are you talking to? Basically, like, what man is this that you're talking to in the middle of the night? And she learns that Aiden is actually like the host of the talk show that she had called in order to help her so that she can find a relationship. So throughout the entire story, obviously she starts having feelings for Aiden and Aiden starts having feelings for her. And it's just like a really good kind of like developed connection between the two of them. It's a little bit of slow burn, but not really. I think the pacing was really good in this one. I thought the writing was really good in this one. And I just really, really enjoyed this. There was definitely angst, but it was like very subtle. And I thought that was very well done. Also, I loved the side characters, like his best friend was really, really funny. There was a lot of like laugh out loud moments with the best friend. And I think he's going to be getting his own book, or at least I'm hoping for that. Yeah, I just felt like they had a really easy connection between the two of them. And it was kind of refreshing because it wasn't like super tension filled, but it was like a subtle tension, but like an easy connection between the two of them. And I really, really liked that. However, towards the end, I did feel like Aiden kept dragging his feet a little bit too much and he needed a little bit too much convincing, where that's like not my favorite thing. I like the guy to be a lot more down bad for like the female main character. And I felt like he needed just a little bit too much of like a push in the right direction, which is not my favorite. But overall, I did really enjoy this book. It was a really sweet romance, a really fun read, and I just had a great time with it. And the writing was really, really good. So I ended up rating this one 4.5 stars. Then the next 2 books I read were The Wicked King and The Queen of Nothing, which are the next 2 books in the Cruel Prince series by Holly Black. And these two were also really, really good. Continued the story of Prince Cardan and Jude. And I did have a really good time with it in terms of like all the events that were happening in these books and like how high stakes they were. And there's like just like a lot of fantasy and politics and stuff going on. However, there's really not very much romance in this series at all whatsoever. And I think that's kind of like what kept pulling me out of the story, because I like having like a romantasy and like some sort of like underlying plot of romance, which this series does not really have. Maybe in this final book, there was like a little bit of a romantic confession, but there's like really not very much romance going on in this series at all whatsoever. So if you're looking for that in this series, you're not going to get it. However, it is really good in terms of like the Fae world and all the politics and high stakes and everything that's going on and like twists and turns and stuff like that. So it's really good in terms of that. So I kind of got pulled out of it because I kind of lost interest a little bit because nothing was going on the romance front, which is fine, you know, like that happens. For some reason, like Cardan just never was a likable character for me. From the first book, he was just never a likable character for me, and he did not recover himself like in these two books either. So I just never could get back into like liking him. And I think I was meant to with like some of the actions that happened, especially in the last book, but it just never like really pulled me back in because he was just so unlikable in the first book. So like him as a character, I just never really got into. But Jude overall is a badass, really great female main character. So I really enjoyed her. But I still ended up enjoying these two books as well. And I'm glad I finished this series. I'm glad I finally read this series because this series has been sitting on my shelf for a couple of years now, and I just never really picked it up. Overall, I think I rated Wicked King 4 stars and The Queen of Nothing 3.75 stars, rounded up to 4 stars on Goodreads, or maybe it was like 3.5 stars or something like that. But yeah, it wasn't my favorite series, but it was still really good for a young adult, like action-packed series. The next book I listened to was on audio only, which is a short little novella by Ali Hazelwood called Two Can Play. And this book basically follows two video game designers or like programmers or something, where they work for like competing agencies. I think their names were Lila and Jesse. And they met 6 years ago, and she thought he was like really good looking and kind of like developed a crush on him. And then they kind of, you know, lost touch because they work for separate companies for quite a while. And now, in order to repair a relationship between the two companies, they end up having to go on the same kind of like company retreat. And so one night, Jesse is playing a drinking game and he gets a little bit too drunk, and she ends up helping him to his room, and he ends up admitting something to her. So overall, it was very, very short, very quick, just like a fun little classic Ali Hazelwood rom-com. I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more if it was either on Kindle or on paper if I could read it, because it was a little bit hard to like get into listening to it just on audio, because I like having audiobooks with something to read along with. But it was still short, it was still fun and like interesting, and I liked the characters. However, I didn't get into the whole like work aspect of it. It kind of confused me. I'm not really a techie person, so everything that they were talking about in terms of like the video game design or like the programming or whatever it is that they were doing, it was just kind of like over my head a little bit. So I didn't really get into that part of it. But overall, the characters and the story had a good progression in it and like pretty good development for a short novella. So I enjoyed it, and I ended up rating that one 4 stars. Then the last book for February that I read was Scythe and Sparrow by Bryn Weaver, which is the third book in the Ruinous Love trilogy and the final book in this trilogy. And I was so sad to be reading this book because I absolutely love this series. I loved Butcher and Blackbird. I loved Leather and Lark. They were both 5 stars for me, and so was this one. This was one of my most anticipated new releases for this year, and I'm so happy that I read it, and it was great and I loved it. But I am very sad that it's over. This one follows the third brother, Fionn, who is a doctor, and his love interest, Rose, who is basically like a circus performer. And in the circus, she does motorcycle tricks, but she also does like tarot card readings. And it starts off with her doing a reading for this woman who is clearly in a bad situation with her husband. Rose is also a little bit of a vigilante on the side, where she gets revenge for women like that one woman that came in. She's also known as like the Sparrow Underground because she does things like that, like this kind of like vigilante stuff on the side. So she ends up going to their house, and she ends up sneaking up on the guy and trying to attack him. However, it doesn't work. and she gets injured in the process and then ends up running away. She has a broken leg and she ends up getting herself to Fion's clinic and kind of passes out. Fion gets alerted that there's somebody in the clinic and he ends up seeing her and helping her. So she ends up staying with him in his house. Throughout the story, he kind of finds out what she's doing on the side because she calls him for help one time. And what's really funny about this is that every time she does her vigilante work, something goes wrong and she's like not very good at it. There were just so many fun little surprising moments in this book that like just made me laugh out loud, and I really, really loved it. And I loved Fionn and I loved Rose. I think they are my two favorite characters. I want to say like this book and Butcher and Blackbird are kind of like on par with each other. I don't know if I like one more than the other. I might even like this one a little bit more than Butcher and Blackbird because I felt like this one maybe had better humorous moments. I think I might have to reread Butcher and Blackbird just to see for sure because that was a while ago since I read that book and this is more recent, obviously. So maybe I just remember it that way, but it was so good. Highly recommend this entire series. There's just so many funny moments in all of these books, really. And I just really, really love them. So they're a very fun concept. They're very different than other books that I've read. They're definitely like very light, rom-com-y, funny, dark romances. So keep that in mind because there is quite a long list of trigger warnings in the beginning of every book. But overall, if you want to dip your toe into dark romances, I highly recommend starting with this series. It's really, really good. And I did just recently learn that she is coming out with another book later this year. The first book in that series is called Tourist Season, and it's the Seasons of Carnage trilogy. So she's having another trilogy coming out, and it does look like it might also be something about killers or serial killers because the main characters on that cover, one is holding an axe and the other one is holding a knife. So that's coming out on September 23rd. Later this year. So I'm super excited about that because when I was reading this book, I was just so sad that it was over. And I'm so happy that she is coming out with another series for us, like another trilogy for us. And we have something to look forward to from Brynn Weaver. And I was super happy about that. I love her. Okay, so obviously this was a 5-star and that was the final book for February that I read. Now let's get into my March wrap up, which is not quite as long as my January, February, because I ended up hitting a little bit of a reading slump in March. But in the month of March, I ended up reading 11 books still, and 3 of those were fantasy, 7 were romance, and 1 was kind of like a general fiction, maybe self-help kind of thing. And it was a total of 4,079 pages. So a little bit less than the 2 previous months, but still not bad. Okay, the first book in March was Lost and Lassoed by Lila Sage, and this is the 3rd book in the Rebel Blue Ranch series, and this one follows Teddy and Gus. And Gus is Emmy's brother. I think it's Emmy's brother from the first book. And Teddy is her best friend. And Teddy is down on her luck right now. She's feeling like she's behind in life because everybody's like doing their own thing. They've got things going on in their lives. People are getting married. People have really good jobs. People are, just like moving on with their lives. And she feels like she's stationary. And she also thrives on being needed. So she's always like there for people. And she's like a very strong character. I really, really liked her. Gus is a single dad and he's really busy with the ranch. He's also a grumpy. She's a sunshine. And he basically needs help with someone watching the kid. So Emmy suggests that Teddy do it because she just got laid off from her job and she's available to watch his kid essentially. And she's somebody that they know and trust. So he agrees. They don't really like each other from the very beginning. They have kind of like a dislike to love situation going on. But the 180 on this man, he really, really, really turns it around. He goes from like this grumpy, no nonsense sort of guy to like the most tender-hearted softy that I've ever read. It was one of the best cases that I've ever read of that happening in any book. And it was just so well done. I absolutely loved it. I loved their banter. Their relationship was developed so well. It was so cozy, so like rom-com-y, but just like one of the sweetest cowboy romances I read. I think this one is my favorite in this series. I think this beat out Done and Dusted. So I'm really, really looking forward to Wild and Wrangled, which is the final book in this series. So I really enjoyed this one. I had the best time with this book. It was obviously a 5-star read and I highly, highly recommend this series. The next one I read was also a cowboy romance, and that was Cash by Jessica Peterson, which is the first book in the Lucky River Ranch series. And this one follows Cash and Molly. So Molly lives in Dallas, Texas, and she runs like a boot design business, like a cowboy boot design business. And her father suddenly dies of a heart attack, and he's like very wealthy and he has a ranch, like kind of somewhere, I want to say it's like in the hill country of Texas. And so she has to go back, and at the reading of the will, she learns that he leaves that ranch to her under one stipulation, and that is that she lives on the ranch and runs it for a year. And Cash, who is the foreman of the ranch, had been told that the father would leave the ranch to him. So he's very surprised at the will reading. He is not very nice to her. He's also a very grumpy cowboy, but she ends up winning him over with her personality and niceness and charm and all that stuff. All that fun cowboy grumpy sunshine stuff that we love in these books. That's basically how this book is set up. At first, I didn't really love him because he was a little bit too grumpy in my opinion, and he felt a little bit too entitled to like the property, even though there was like nothing written in a contract or anything like that. So I felt like he felt a little bit too entitled to it. I was definitely on her side from the beginning, but he comes around and he becomes one of the sweetest, most caring guys, and he knows what he wants. He's very down bad for her, and he like makes sure that she knows it. And it was just a really good story to get lost in, and just like an overall fun, spicy read. So I really enjoyed it. I ended up rating this one 4 stars and highly recommend the series if you like spicy cowboy romances. The next book I read was Collide by Bel Cabra, and this is the first book in her Off the Ice series. This one follows Summer and Aiden. And Summer is studying to be a sports psychologist, and Aiden is the leader of the hockey team, or the captain of the hockey team. And so in order for her to complete her thesis, she has to work with him on this project, and he has to help her because he got in trouble with something. So it's just like a standard hockey romance, very similar to Icebreaker, but I think Icebreaker was better in terms of character development, in my opinion, than this one. This one felt a little bit more like surface level. Everything was kind of surface level and not very deep in terms of like character development or anything that happened to them or any of the events that occurred. So I didn't enjoy it quite as much, but it was still fun and fast and like nothing much going on. You know, Summer is supposed to be kind of like more of a black cat, kind of like emotional, kind of like the grumpy in the situation, whereas Aiden is like the golden retriever, and he's very down bad for her right from the beginning. But she has this thing about hockey players because of her past where she doesn't go into relationships with hockey players, and so they do this kind of like friends with benefits thing, but he ends up having feelings for her immediately and is just kind of like down bad for her right from the start, whereas she's not really reciprocating that. She's a little bit mean to him. She's a little bit bratty. I don't know. The character development just wasn't there for me. It was a little bit surface level. So overall, this was good, and I did like the writing in this book, but I just wasn't really feeling their relationship, and I wasn't really feeling connected to the characters. It was just kind of like middle of the road on that front. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars because it was fast paced, a good like hockey romance, just like a fast-paced, spicy hockey romance. So 3 stars, okay, but not the best. Then the next book I read was Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. This was again a reread, and I did the annotations for it and listened to the graphic audio. And this one unfortunately put me in a reading slump. I really love my annotation tabs in here because I kind of tried to match them to the book cover, and I just really love how that looks. And it has like the black sprayed edges so you can hardly see them, but they are there. There's a lot of them. Unfortunately, this one was the same on the reread as the first time that I read it. It was a 3 star. I ended up keeping my rating the same. This one was just way too much information dumping for me. I couldn't really get into it, even though I was listening to the graphic audio, which made it move quickly. It was still really, really long. It was still a lot of stuff happening that I didn't care about that much, and not that much progression in the romance between the 2 main characters. So I ended up keeping my rating the same for this one. I ended up being in a reading slump after this one for quite a while, and I struggled to get myself out of it. And I feel like now I'm finally out of it. It took me a while to get out of it, but I'm just glad I'm out of it. I still have not been able to pick up Onyx Storm because of it, because I'm afraid that that one will also put me in a reading slump. So I'm just kind of putting it off as long as possible. But hopefully I get this series finished up soon. I know there's supposed to be 5 books in this series, but these are the only ones that are out right now. Obviously, everybody knows that. So that's all I have to say about this one. 3 stars for Iron Flame. The next book I read was Love in the Time of Serial Killers by Alicia Thompson. And this basically follows Phoebe and Sam. And Phoebe is from a divorced family, like her parents were divorced and her dad dies. And so she has to go to Florida to deal with his estate. Now she is working on her dissertation on true crime, and she's like really into true crime. And in her life, she constantly thinks that people could potentially be serial killers. And so she's always very suspicious of everyone that she ever encounters. And that includes Sam. And Sam is the next door neighbor who used to live next door to her father. She's also a little bit like prickly socially, which I thought was very interesting, but she does come around like later and actually becomes like a very relatable character. There's a lot of emotional stuff going on with her, like dealing with like her father's passing and the divorce and like reconnecting with her brother and just like a lot of emotional stuff going on. And I really liked Sam because he was really a very patient character, and he was just like sweet overall, helpful, reliable throughout everything. And he's a little bit quirky and weird too at times. There was a third act breakup kind of over nothing in my opinion, but it did get resolved pretty quickly, like better and faster than a lot of books that I've read, so it wasn't too bad. And overall, I did enjoy it. I like the writing, but it is one of those stories that I don't think I'll be thinking about very often. I don't think this one really made much of an impact because there were times that I actually forgot that I read this. But in the moment, I did enjoy it. So I ended up rating this one 3.5 stars. Okay. I'm already on my third battery, guys. We have so many books, but we have not that many left. We've got 5 left to go, maybe 6 left to go. Okay, the next book I read was Do Your Worst by Rosie Danan, and this one follows Riley, who is a professional curse breaker. And this is kind of like an art that's been passed down for generations in her family, and she turned it into a career where she breaks curses. And so she gets hired by this company to come to Scotland, I think Scotland or Ireland, probably Scotland. Yeah, Scotland, to this famous castle and break the curse that's on the castle. But when she gets there, the first night, she ends up meeting this guy at a bar, Clark, and they hit it off, like really hit it off. And so lo and behold, the next day when she goes to the castle to meet with the team that hired her, Clark is on that team. And she learns that he actually wants to get her fired because he doesn't believe in the hocus pocus of like her profession. And he thinks that she is just going to get in his way because he's there to discover artifacts. He's an archaeologist. So he wants her fired. He wants her gone. He doesn't want to work with her. But instead, obviously, she does not get fired. Instead, they end up working very closely together, and it turns into this kind of like rivals to lovers situation. I thought this was actually really good. There wasn't a lot of very like cute, funny banter or anything like that, but it was really good in the sense that they stayed enemies for a very long time, like much longer than most books. Like they just kept at it, like they kept disliking each other and they kept being enemies for a very long time. And I thought that was actually really well written and kind of cool. I did like the characters. They didn't really stand out to me in any way whatsoever, or it could have also been due to the slump. Like nothing really was sticking with me. I didn't really love anything. Like I still liked it and enjoyed it, and it had really good spooky vibes. So definitely recommend reading this like as a palate cleanser in between fantasy books in the fall or something, like if you're interested. And it was just like a good time in general. It was like an okay time. I ended up rating this one 3 stars and would definitely recommend as a palate cleanser in the fall. The next book I read was Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young, and this book follows Win and Bo. And they both meet at her best friend's Halloween party because they're both dressed as pirates, and they both have something in common that makes it easier for them to hit it off, and they do a one-night stand. Well, lo and behold, she gets pregnant from that one-night stand, and that's what this book is about. It's an unplanned pregnancy trope, and I actually don't like that trope very much in any book, but this was done differently because that was like the entire topic of this book. It wasn't just like a trope that was thrown in at the end for like drama's sake. It was actually like an event that happened, and it was like treated with the care and intensity that it deserves because it is like a life-altering situation in both parties' lives that they're both responsible for and they both initiated. So like I felt like this book did a really good job of treating that with the heaviness that it deserves, I guess. So I really enjoyed it. I loved their characters. They were a little awkward and like weird at the beginning, but that was just like their personality. It was very emotional. I did cry several times, especially towards the end. It was a very sweet book, and I loved their friend group and the found family that was going on with this book. Bo also had a lot of emotional things going on in his life. It wasn't just about like her being pregnant and him helping her. She was also helping him with a lot of the emotional stuff that he was dealing with. So it felt even and fair. And I just really really like that about this book. I ended up rating this one 4.5 stars. Everything in this book just felt like really special and sweet, and I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend if you haven't read this yet. The next book I read was Pestilence by Laura Thalassa, which is the first book in the Four Horsemen series, and this one follows Sarah, who is a firefighter and the first horseman of the apocalypse, pestilence. And essentially the earth is already in an apocalypse and pestilence is coming through, and he's like riding on a horse, and everywhere he goes people end up getting the plague and dying. And there's a lot of vigilantes out there trying to kill him, and Sarah is one of them. She's a firefighter, she's brave, and so she decides that she's going to kill him, or try to kill him, and so she does. However, he is immortal, so he doesn't die when she tries to kill him, and instead he takes her as his prisoner and kind of like takes her along for the ride as he's going through the world and killing people with the plague. I have not read an apocalyptic romance before, but not gonna say that I loved it or anything. It was a little bit weird because it was just kind of like the journey and her going along with it, and then her trying to maybe change his mind from like killing all these people. But there were a lot of like gruesome scenes, like of just like people dying, and she can't do anything to help them, but he's just continuously killing people. It's about all that happens in here. I mean, there's like a couple other things, a few plot twists, but I just really wasn't into the story that much, and I felt like there were some plot holes and some things that weren't explained very well, and it just all kind of felt a little bit ridiculous to me. Obviously it's meant to be ridiculous, but it also felt ridiculous. It wasn't one of those books where you kind of like get lost in the ridiculousness of the story, where you just kind of like know that it's not real. Obviously it's not real, but you still kind of like enjoy the story and get lost in it. This wasn't one of those books. It was okay, but it wasn't great. There's 3 other books in this series which I have, unfortunately, and I will probably eventually read them, but no, this is not my favorite series. I bought this series because I loved Bewitched and Bespelled by this author, her newer releases, and these are the older ones. So unfortunately it was okay, but it wasn't great. I rated it 2.5 stars, and I think I actually rated down to 2 stars on Goodreads. Then the next book I read was Out of the Woods by Hannah Bonham Young, which is the second book after Out on a Limb, and this one follows the best friends Sarah and Caleb, who are a married couple, and they've been married for a very long time. I think they met when they were like 17 years old, high school sweethearts, and they ended up getting married very young. And now Caleb is very well to do. He got a very successful job, and Sarah doesn't. She kind of feels like she's stuck in a rut. She doesn't have anything of her own, and she was running this fundraiser which was not very successful, and she just wants a change in her life because she feels like Caleb is always coming to her rescue, and she doesn't have anything that she can be proud of because she hasn't really created anything. She's in this state of like unprocessed grief because she lost her mom at a pretty young age, and Caleb was there for her and emotionally supported her through that time, and he continues to do so throughout their life. So they end up going on this like couples retreat where they can reignite their relationship. It's not really a second chance because they never break up and they're still married throughout the entire thing, but they go to like reignite their relationship. And there's like a therapist there who's supposed to help them deal with their issues. Overall, I did see where she was coming from in terms of wanting something of her own, but she did come off a little bit like annoying and petulant at the beginning, but they do work through it, and she comes around later and she becomes a lot more likable throughout the book. And I did really, really love Caleb throughout this entire book because he was always there for her. He was understanding. He did what needed to be done. Their communication was really, really good. Like he listened and understood that she's unhappy in the relationship, and he did what needed to be done in order for them to get to the next level and, you know, fix things. I really liked how like ride or die they were with each other, and, you know, like they have a whole life history together. So like it just made their relationship feel really, really special. And I just really enjoyed the book. I rated this one 4.5 stars. So highly recommend both of these books. They're really well written, really well done, and really good emotional reads. The next book I read was Our Infinite Fates by Laura Stephen, and this is actually a young adult fantasy following Evelyn and Arden. And this book was advertised as like very similar vibes to The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. And if you've read that book, you probably would love this book. And I did really love Addie LaRue, and I immediately purchased this when it came out, and it is the one with the pretty gold edges. So I love the look of this book, and I actually really, really love this book as well. It is written so beautifully. The writing in this book is absolutely beautiful. It is descriptive and lyrical, but it's not flowery. It's really, really good writing. Highly recommend even just for that. But this book follows Evelyn and Arden, and essentially what happens is that they are like these fated mates where their fates are intertwined in every lifetime, and they keep getting reincarnated into every lifetime, and in every lifetime they essentially fall in love again and end up having to kill each other. Like Arden keeps killing Evelyn and we don't know why. He essentially has to kill her before she turns 18 in every single lifetime. We end up finding out why, obviously, but that's like the mystery throughout this entire book, and it's so incredibly well done and so interesting. And it just goes through all of these lifetimes, and they're like different people in every lifetime. Sometimes they're both men, sometimes they're both women, sometimes she's like a male and he's female. So it just like, it doesn't matter who they are in that lifetime, but they remember, like at a certain point, everything clicks and they remember the life and they remember what needs to happen in every lifetime, and he ends up having to kill her. It is so like intriguing and like sucks you in right away, and I was just very pulled into the story. I just really, really loved it. It was so interesting. I really couldn't put it down. I think I read this in one day, maybe 2 days, but I just loved everything about it, the mystery aspect of it and just like the romances of it. And it was very magical, very unique, a very unique concept. I've never read anything like it before. It's magical realism, obviously, and it was just so, so beautiful, so beautifully written, so interesting. I couldn't put it down, and I highly recommend. This was a 5-star read and probably one of my top reads of the year. Okay, and then the final book I listened to on audio was The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning by Margareta Magnusson. And this is, I don't know if this is supposed to be self-help or just kind of like work of fiction or whatever, but I went into this kind of thinking that it was going to be similar to Marie Kondo's The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, where she discusses like getting your life together in terms of putting your home together, like in terms of like cleaning and tidying up and stuff. And this was kind of like similar to that, but it was mostly like this woman's story. And she was discussing the subject of Swedish death cleaning, which is basically throughout your entire life, you should start cleaning out your house and like getting rid of stuff so that when you die, you don't actually leave your family members with like all your stuff to go through, you know? So like you're doing them a favor by doing it throughout your life. And I liked this book, but there was something about this book that I actually didn't like, because there wasn't a lot of like motivational stuff in it. There wasn't a lot of like tips and tricks or anything like that. It was just kind of like talking about her life and like why you should do this, which is fine, but I didn't find it inspirational in any way whatsoever. And there's also a situation in this book where she discusses about the family pet, which severely triggered me, and I was very upset after that. So if you are sensitive to anything that happens to pets in books, I actually recommend you do not read this book because it will trigger you. It definitely triggered me very severely. So I did not like this book. I didn't find anything helpful in it, and unfortunately it just wasn't what I expected either. Like there was nothing really in it that could impact my life in any way whatsoever. Sometimes I just like to read stuff like that about cleaning because it's like inspirational and motivational and stuff like that, but this book was not that. There was one quote in it that I actually remember that I liked that kind of put things in perspective for me a little bit, because I think she said that as we get older, it might seem like time is moving faster, but that's not really the case. What is really the case is that we get slower. So that's why she recommends doing Swedish death cleaning like throughout your entire life and not waiting until you get old to do it. But yeah, I did listen to that book. It was short, it was fast. It didn't really impact my life in any way whatsoever, except for the major trigger related to the pet. Let me know if you did listen to this book at one point or read this book at one point, because I want to know how you felt about that. So yeah, so that was the last book. I rated that one 2 stars. I didn't like it, and I probably should have given it 1 star or DNF'd it, but it was very short actually. I think it was only like 3 or 4 hours on audio, and I got through it really quickly. So that was the last book, and that is the end of this video. Those are all the books I read in January, February, and March. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you staying this long if you have watched it to this point in the video. All my links are down below to my Instagram, Goodreads, and TikTok. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.